Today, we will be looking at two horrifying caving stories that went horribly wrong. The first one is something we've never covered before, as it chronicles a devastating 1930 tragedy that inspired the renowned novel The Cave Electrician's Widow. And don't miss out on the second one, as even maintaining what seemed like a safe distance from the cave's entrance, the victim was still pulled into its deadly embrace. As always, viewer discretion is advised. In the darkness before dawn, on April 24th, 1930, deadly gas was about to seep through the limestone corridors of Howe Caverns, turning a routine morning into a nightmare that would expose the dangerous consequences of industrial negligence. The silence of the New York hills was broken as workers at the North American cement company quarry prepared their biggest blast of the season, a massive detonation that would unleash forces beyond their control. 7.5 tons of dynamite lay packed into carefully drilled holes, ready to blast away 60,000 tons of limestone from the hillside. At exactly 5 in the morning, the earth shook with tremendous violence as the explosive charge erupted with a thunderclap that could be heard for miles, sending shockwaves through the bedrock and creating a network of hairline cracks that spread through the limestone formations like spider webs, reaching toward the cave system below. The quarry workers, satisfied with their successful blast, had no idea that their explosion had just opened pathways for something far more dangerous than falling rock. Owen Wallace, the 27-year-old chief electrician who kept the cavern's lighting system working perfectly for the thousands of visitors who went underground each year, arrived at work with no sense of the deadly danger that was entering his workplace. With him walked John Sagendorf, a 45-year-old company secretary whose commitment to the cavern went far beyond his office duties, often bringing him into the depths alongside the technical staff to make sure every part of the operation met the highest standards. The two men entered the elevator that would take them into what they thought was the safe, familiar environment of the tourist cave, completely unaware that the very air they were about to breathe had been contaminated by the morning's quarry blast. Deep within the cracked limestone, poisonous gases began their silent journey through newly created fissures, seeping through tiny cracks and following the natural shape of the rock formations as they moved toward the vast network of chambers that made up Howe Caverns. Carbon monoxide, hydrogen sulfide, and other lethal compounds that had been trapped within the rock for thousands of years were now free to flow like an invisible stream through the underground passages where tourists had admired nature's beauty just hours before. As the elevator dropped through the natural shaft that connected the surface to the underground chambers, the invisible gases were already moving through the limestone corridors, following air currents and natural ventilation patterns that would guide them directly toward the areas where Wallace and Sagendorf would be working. The Bell of Moscow Formation, a spectacular limestone structure that had become one of the cavern's most popular attractions, stood in the chamber where the two men began their routine maintenance work, its natural beauty hiding the deadly atmosphere that was slowly building around them. The gases moved steadily through the cave system, flowing along the floor of passages and collecting in low areas where they would remain undetected until it was too late. Wallace worked on the electrical connections that powered the lights illuminating the formations, while Sagendorf checked the walkways and safety barriers that protected visitors from the cave's natural hazards, neither man noticing the subtle changes in air quality that were happening around them as the concentration of toxic gases gradually increased to deadly levels. The invisible threat crept closer with each passing minute, following the natural airflow patterns that would inevitably bring it into contact with anyone working in the deepest sections of the cave. The first symptoms may have been barely noticeable, a slight shortness of breath that could easily be blamed on the physical work, or mild dizziness that might have seemed like nothing more than the result of working in the artificial lighting underground. But the gases were relentless in their attack on the human body, binding to red blood cells and preventing the transport of oxygen to vital organs, even as their victims continued to breathe what looked like normal air. As the toxic concentration reached deadly levels, Wallace and Sagendorf experienced a terrifying increase in symptoms that turned their routine morning into a desperate fight for survival, their vision blurring and their coordination failing as the invisible poison moved through their bloodstreams. The cave system that had been like a second home for years suddenly became a death trap, its familiar passages transformed into dangerous corridors, where each breath brought them closer to unconsciousness and death. The moment when both men collapsed in the depths of the cavern marked the terrible end of a chain of events that had been set in motion by the morning's quarry blast, their bodies finally giving in to the toxic attack that had been building in their systems with each breath. In the eerie silence of the underground chamber, lit only by the electrical systems that Wallace had maintained so carefully, 2 lives were ended by an enemy they never saw coming. Meanwhile, on the surface, a 25-year-old cave guide was growing worried about his missing colleagues, his concern increasing as the minutes passed, without any sign of Wallace and Sagendorf returning from what should have been a quick maintenance check. The guide's decision to go into the cave system to look for them would prove to be both heroic and nearly fatal, as he unknowingly descended into the same toxic atmosphere that had already killed 2 men. Following the route he knew the missing men had taken, the guide made his way through passages that were still being filled with deadly gases, each step taking him deeper into an environment where the air itself had become poisonous. His discovery of the collapsed bodies of Wallace and Sagendorf in the chamber near the Bell of Moscow formation was a moment of pure shock, but even as he tried to understand the tragedy before him, the same invisible killer was beginning its attack on his own body. The guide's growing awareness that he was experiencing the same symptoms that had killed his colleagues, the increasing dizziness, the trouble breathing, the growing weakness that threatened to pull him down into the same unconsciousness that had claimed Wallace and Sagendorf, turned his rescue mission into a desperate race against time to escape the toxic environment before it could claim a 3rd victim. Fighting against the effects of gas poisoning that grew stronger with each passing second, he gave up any hope of helping the fallen men and focused entirely on reaching the elevator that was his only path to survival. The guide's terrifying journey back through the poisoned passages, struggling against failing coordination and fading consciousness as he stumbled toward the elevator, showed incredible human determination in the face of death. Each step was a victory against the toxic gases that wanted to drag him down with his colleagues. His survival hanging in the balance as he fought to stay conscious long enough to reach the surface and raise the alarm. His collapse upon reaching the surface was a dramatic and frightening announcement of the disaster that had happened in the depths below, his barely conscious condition providing clear evidence of the deadly conditions that had developed within the cave system. The immediate rush to get the guide to a hospital in Albany, where doctors worked to treat the effects of gas poisoning, showed just how severe the toxic exposure had been that had already killed 2 men and nearly killed a 3rd. Upon confirmation of the severity and gas threat, rescue teams assembled. Using oxygen equipment and gas mitigation precautions, though rudimentary by modern standards, they successfully retrieved Wallace and Sagendorf's bodies and brought them to the surface later that morning. As news of the tragedy spread through the community of Brahmanville, Elizabeth Eliza Millspaugh found herself at the center of a communications crisis that overwhelmed the small town's telephone system, her switchboard becoming the control center for frantic calls between the Caverns management, emergency responders, grieving family members, and newspaper reporters who were beginning to understand the size of the story developing in the depths of Howe Caverns. The medical examination of Owen Wallace and John Sagendorf confirmed what the guide's near-death experience had already suggested. Both men had died from suffocation caused by poisonous gases that had entered the cave system, their deaths directly connected to the morning's quarry blast that had unknowingly opened pathways for the invisible killer to reach them in their underground workplace. The aftermath of the tragedy brought Martha Wallace and Mabel Sagendorf together in grief and determination. The 2 widows united in their belief that their husbands' deaths were the result of carelessness by the North American Cement Company, whose massive quarry blast had created the conditions that turned a routine workday into a death sentence. Their decision to take legal action against the powerful corporation started a David versus Goliath battle that would continue for years, capturing public attention and highlighting the broader issues of industrial safety and corporate responsibility. However, archival summaries do not clarify the final verdict. Whether the widows won compensation or if the company was absolved remains uncertain in publicly available documentation. Now, just when you think it couldn't get worse, the next story takes us even deeper into silent horror. On July 31st, 2010, what began as a perfect family outing in the scenic wilderness of Snohomish County, Washington, would end in unspeakable tragedy when nature unleashed its violent power in a split second that would forever shatter the lives of the Tam family and expose the deadly reality that even the most beautiful natural attractions can become death traps without warning. The Big Four ice caves had long been one of Washington State's most popular hiking destinations, drawing thousands of families each year to witness the spectacular ice formations that created natural caverns within the mountain's rocky face. The trail leading to these frozen wonders stretched for exactly 1 mile through dense Pacific Northwest forest, winding through towering evergreens and across rushing streams that carried the melted remnants of ancient glaciers down toward the valleys below. The Tam family had planned this excursion as a special treat, packing a carefully prepared picnic lunch and setting out early in the morning to make the most of their day in the wilderness. Grace Tam, an 11-year-old girl whose intelligence and sweet nature had already made her a favorite among, walked eagerly alongside her parents as they made their way up the familiar trail that thousands of other families had traveled safely before them. The morning air was crisp and clean as the family completed their mile-long hike, their anticipation building with each step as they approached the legendary ice caves that had formed over countless winters through the patient work of freezing water and shifting temperatures. The massive ice formations that awaited them at the trail's end were truly spectacular, creating natural architecture that seemed almost too perfect to be real, with walls of blue-white ice that caught and reflected the filtered sunlight streaming through the forest canopy above. Large yellow warning signs had been posted along the trail and near the cave entrances, their bold lettering clearly stating that visitors should not enter the ice caves themselves due to the inherent dangers of unstable ice formations and the constant risk of falling debris. These warnings were the result of years of experience by park officials who understood that the same natural processes that created the cave's beauty also made them incredibly dangerous, with massive chunks of ice constantly shifting, cracking, and breaking away as temperatures fluctuated throughout the day. The Tam family, like responsible visitors before them, heeded these warnings and chose to admire the ice caves from what they believed was a safe distance outside the entrance, settling down on a large rock formation approximately 15 feet, 4.6 meters, from the cave opening to enjoy their picnic lunch, while taking in the breathtaking view of the frozen formations. Grace sat contentedly between her parents on the rocky outcrop, her young eyes wide with wonder at the natural spectacle before them, completely unaware that high above their heads, invisible forces were already at work that would turn their peaceful moment into a nightmare. The ice formations within the caves were in constant motion, even when they appeared perfectly still to the human eye, as the relentless cycle of freezing and thawing created enormous pressure within the frozen structures that could build for hours or even days before reaching a critical breaking point. Temperature variations throughout the day, combined with the weight of accumulated ice and the natural settling of the formations, created conditions where massive chunks of ice could break away from the cave ceiling or walls with absolutely no warning, transforming from solid architectural elements into deadly projectiles in the space of a heartbeat. On this particular afternoon, as the Tam family enjoyed their lunch and marveled at the natural beauty surrounding them, the stresses within the ice formation above the cave entrance had reached the point of no return, though there was no visible sign of the catastrophe that was about to unfold. The chunk of ice that had been slowly separating from the main formation was enormous, roughly the size of a pickup truck and weighing several tons, suspended high above the cave entrance like a sword hanging by an invisible thread. Without any sound of warning, without any preliminary cracking or shifting that might have alerted the family to move to safety, the massive ice formation suddenly broke free from its moorings and plummeted toward the earth with the unstoppable force of gravity, its trajectory carrying it directly toward the spot where Grace sat peacefully with her parents. The little girl had no time to react, no opportunity to move out of the way, no chance to escape the path of the falling ice that would crush her young life in an instant. The sound of the impact was tremendous, a sickening crash that echoed through the forest and brought the family's perfect day to an abrupt and horrifying end, as Grace disappeared beneath tons of ice that had fallen from the cave formation above. Her parents, sitting just inches away, were suddenly faced with every parent's worst nightmare, as they realized that their daughter had been struck by the massive chunk of ice and was trapped beneath its crushing weight. The immediate aftermath of the accident revealed both the best and worst aspects of human nature, as complete strangers who had been visiting the ice caves that day immediately rushed to help, abandoning their own recreational activities to assist in what everyone hoped against hope might still be a rescue operation. These Good Samaritans began performing CPR on Grace, even as it became apparent that her injuries were catastrophic, their desperate efforts to save her life continuing even when the situation seemed hopeless. While some visitors worked frantically to provide medical assistance to the gravely injured child, others made the difficult decision to leave the scene and run back down the mile-long trail toward the parking area, knowing that their only hope of getting professional help lay in reaching a location where cell phone service was available. The remote location of the Big Four ice caves meant that cellular coverage was non-existent at the trailhead, forcing the would-be rescuers to drive an additional 7 miles, 11.3 kilometers, down winding mountain roads before they could establish contact with emergency services. The communication with rescue services began a race against time that was ultimately doomed from the start, as the remote location of the accident scene and the difficulty of transporting emergency medical equipment up the mile-long hiking trail created logistical challenges that would have tested even the most efficient rescue operation. Professional rescue workers faced the daunting task of carrying specialized medical equipment and stretchers up a trail that was never designed for emergency vehicle access. Their progress slowed by the rough terrain and the urgent need to reach the accident scene as quickly as possible. 2 hours and 20 minutes passed between the moment of impact and the arrival of professional rescue personnel at the Big Four ice caves. An eternity for the family members and strangers who continued their desperate efforts to save Grace's life throughout that agonizing period. Despite the heroic efforts of everyone involved, both the immediate volunteers who provided CPR and the professional rescue workers who eventually reached the scene, Grace Tam succumbed to the crushing pelvic injuries she had sustained when the massive chunk of ice fell on her small body. The medical examination that followed confirmed what had been apparent from the moment of impact. Grace had suffered injuries that were simply incompatible with life, her small frame unable to withstand the tremendous force of several tons of ice falling from the height of the cave formation above. The 11-year-old girl who had begun the day with such excitement and anticipation, looking forward to seeing one of nature's most spectacular displays, had become the victim of the same natural forces that created the beauty she had come to admire. The aftermath of Grace Tam's death sent shockwaves through the hiking and outdoor recreation community, raising serious questions about the safety measures in place at popular natural attractions and the adequacy of warning systems designed to protect visitors from the inherent dangers of unstable natural formations. Grace's father, Eric Tam, channeled his grief into advocacy, pressing park officials and government agencies to implement enhanced safety measures that might prevent other families from experiencing the same devastation. The tragedy at Big Four ice caves serves as a stark reminder that nature's beauty often comes with hidden dangers that can turn deadly without warning, and that even the most careful and responsible visitors can find themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time when natural forces decide to unleash their power. Grace Tam's death was not the result of reckless behavior or ignoring safety warnings. She and her family had followed all posted guidelines and maintained what they believed was a safe distance from the ice caves themselves. The investigation into the accident revealed that falling ice and rock around cave entrances is a constant concern at such locations, with the natural processes of freezing, thawing, and structural stress creating conditions where massive chunks can break away at any time without warning. The large yellow signs posted along the trail, warning visitors not to enter the caves, were designed to prevent people from venturing into the most dangerous areas. But they could not account for the possibility that deadly debris might fall well outside.